afternoon. I'm John Mundy, in case you don't know, and this we call Miracles in Manhattan, one Sunday afternoon a month. We've been doing this for about 5.5 years now. We take time to stop and to talk about this incredible book called A Course in Miracles, which I think is kind of a perfect book. It's all there, and at the same time that it's all there, it's always been here. And what I mean by always been here is, well, first of all, the truth has always been true, right? And it's always been accessible, and it's always been possible for people to hear and to know the Word of God. And one of the things that we're going to be doing today is looking back and seeing how it was revealed, what shall we say, David, 3,000 years?
We're not absolutely sure, but definitely 3,000 years.
At least 3,000 years, maybe more than 3,000 years. 3,000 is when we're talking about it getting written down. You know, we're not talking about when it comes into someone's mind.
Right.
That we wouldn't know at all, right? One of the things that's exciting to me about the Course is that it is a form, it says of itself twice. This is one form of a universal course, right? So that gets me kind of interested. What is the universal course? And it says it's one form of the many thousands. So that'd be thousands upon thousands. So it's really, the Course kind of works for us in terms of who we are and where we are, in terms of our personality and our ethnic backgrounds and all that kind of stuff that kind of determine who we are in terms of the view that we have of the world. So all the views need to be focused around to where all we see is God, right? And one of the ways that this is true is with Vedanta, which we're going to be looking at today. Back in August, some of you may remember that we had a session on Zen Buddhism and the Course, and there's a lot of similarities with Zen and the Course as well, but I think the one we're looking at today has really got a lot of exciting similarities. And I didn't want to do this myself because I know David here is someone who's very deeply into studying Vedanta. Let me tell you a little bit about how I know David and then introduce him briefly. I really know him originally through this lady here who happens to be his partner in life. This is Lynn Matus, and Lynn and David both, David Brown, edit everything I write. So that's why it's so good. Well, I'm honored that you, at least my last 4 books, I think, and probably for the last 2 or 3 years at least or more, most of the articles that are in Miracles magazine, the ones that I write, they straighten me out, which is really nice to have somebody who can straighten you out, right? Well, the form is, we're going back to the Course. There's a lot of Course in there, right? So David and I are going to kind of go back and forth here. What we do is we go for an hour. It's now, we go till 2:45, and then we take a 15-minute break, and then we come back and we go till 4 o'clock or maybe a few minutes after 4, okay? But I want to do a formal introduction of David, and to do that, is going to require my reading a little bit about him. During the 1980s, following a deep awakening at an encounter group therapy session, that's a good time to have an awakening, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it forces you to look at the truth, right?
Young enough to survive it.
And survive it, yeah. Well, actually be enlightened by it, right? David Brown spent 9 months in India with Swami Chinmayananda, whose picture will come up much later on, the founder of the Chinmayananda mission worldwide. David traveled all over India with Swami and received his teaching of Vedanta firsthand. Subsequent to that life-changing experience, David has continued his studies of Vedanta with Vedanta scholars in the United States, and he has studied and has led study groups in Vedanta, which, in case you don't know, non-dualistic thinking, for over 20 years, finding connecting thread of truth in all true spirituality. David also spent several years in Toronto as a student of Lama Namse,
Mm-hmm.
a Tibetan Buddhist monk, and prior to Kin Wapnick's passing, which interestingly enough, let's take a moment and just recognize it was 5 years ago this month that David, where David came from. I was still talking about David. Ken
Yeah.
left us.
Yeah.
We could talk about that sometime. December 27th, 2013. It's hard to believe that it comes around so quickly, right? So from this point on, kind of going to turn it over to David, and I'll bounce in once in a while with a slide. We'll start off first of all with this slide, which I thought was sort of fun. And when the mind disappears, the vision of ultimate reality takes its place. David, I'm going to let you do the talking.
We agreed this would be a duet. So we both learned to sing together, right?
All right, we'll try.
Yeah, we'll try. This session that we're joining together, and it's a great pleasure to be here, I should add, and it's a lot of fun also. It's most enjoyable. Is really to give you some insight into Vedanta, and I'm very happy to do that because of my own love for my teacher, Chinmayananda. We use a few Sanskrit words in Vedanta, which are sometimes a little hard to understand. But the reason for that is that the English language is naturally dualistic. We always talk about he or she. We always refer to relationships and understanding and situations which are dualistic. So the only reason for wanting to use Sanskrit words is to really highlight the fact that there is a difference in the way in which we look at an understanding of truth, bearing in mind that, strictly speaking, we can't talk about it. If one thinks for a moment, that the reality that we're pointing to is beyond words. Words are only indicators. They are simply expressions, and the content of each word depends upon what is included in our minds when we hear the words. Because each individual understanding is unique, and it's enormously based on one's background, experience, and willingness to be open. So this, I really appreciate John asking me to share some of this with you. He mentioned my background. When I was in my 30s, I found myself in a very difficult personal situation. I'd lost a loved one very, very suddenly indeed. And prior to even meeting this person, I had emigrated to Canada and found myself alone because my wife and my 3 children decided they didn't want to stay in Canada and went back to England. So what originally turned out to be a fairly scheduled odyssey ended up being a real meltdown for me. And so I realized I had a lot of work to do on myself. So in those days we had encounter groups where we all sat in a circle and took turns to sit on a cushion, and we worked on ourselves, worked on our understanding of who and what we are. And it was just incredibly fortunate for me that the teacher I had at that time, and I knew absolutely nothing, I was zero, totally in my ego consciousness, introduced us to music, art, and dance. And for me, at my early 30s, music, art, and dance was something that I'd never done before. I worked as an accountant. I moved into computer systems. I was definitely cerebral in everything that I was doing. This was really an awakening for me. And so really what I want to try to illustrate is awareness of the truth, whether it's in the form of Vedanta or in the form of the Course in Miracles, is really learning to, as it were, be free and open and loving and just willing to dance the dance. It's not talking the talk. That's the big difference. We understand each other through verbal communication, but we empathize with each other through our inner awareness. And so we approach the truth from the standpoint of empathy. Understanding gets us part of the way, but it doesn't finish the job. So what I want to do in introducing Vedanta, which is somewhat intellectual, in the yoga terminology, we'll get to another slide in a minute, John.
All right, whatever.
There are three, as it were, forms of preparation, what's called karma yoga, bhakti yoga, and jnana yoga. This is in the Eastern tradition. Karma yoga is right action, what we call dharma. Bhakti yoga is devotion, loving kindness to all others, and understanding that the God in all is that one presence which illumines all of life. And jnana yoga is a supporting knowledge. And what does jnana yoga point to? Exactly what it says in the Course of Miracles. John, chime in. We are not bodies. Yeah? We only appear in this form for a purpose. Would you like to add something?
Well, just one of the interesting lines in the Course. I love really short little sentences. And one of them is, not for a single instant does the body exist at all. What? Not for a single instant does it exist at all? That's because, as you were saying, it's ephemeral.
Exactly.
Right.
And this leads us into the slide before. If you can back up one slide.
Back up?
Yeah.
This one?
That one.
Okay.
This is a very favorite analogy of mine. This kind of illustrates the relationship between the individual concept of what we are, which is aham, I, or the ego, the presence that's sitting in this room, and the totality of consciousness. If we take the image of the ocean has waves. Every wave is nothing but ocean water. We instinctively understand that. But the English language, just like Eskimos have a dozen words for snow, we have different ways of understanding a wave, right from a tsunami to a little ripple on a quiet pond in the evening with the moonlight. So, what is the difference between the ocean and the wave? It's just form, isn't it? It's not actuality. It's appearance only. So if we understand that what we are waves on the ocean of consciousness, what do we understand that we are? Yeah? Are we separate? Is the wave separate from the ocean? In truth? No. Only in appearance. So if we say we are not bodies, what we understand from that is, what are we then? And if we understand the principles expounded in the Course of Miracles and in Vedanta, we straight away say, I am consciousness. In Sanskrit, that's Vijnanam Brahma. There are 4 great sayings in Sanskrit, in the teaching of the Upanishads. And the first is, this individual self is nothing but an appearance in consciousness. Consciousness is all there is. So that's this beautiful picture here of what the ocean represents in relationship to the wave. I am ocean water. The wave is an appearance. It comes and goes. It may have thoughts of saying, oh, but I'm a beautiful wave. I'm a new wave. I'm a young and exciting and energetic wave. I'm a powerful wave. I'm going to create all sorts of things in this world of waves. And the ocean, what's the ocean going to say to all of that? Yeah? It's just going to say, Eventually you will realize that you are nothing but ocean. That is the waking up that both and all of these methods of teaching are to introduce us to. We are not what we think. We are this pure presence which emanates all forms of life. Not some life in preference to other lives, Another example is the sun, which shines everywhere without any concerns whatsoever on what it illumines. Then simply say, if I am the sun, do I know anything about darkness? Do I know anything about the choice of where to shine? Am I not just pure light? In totality, one without a second? So that's the second teaching of Vedanta, which John can introduce the equivalent to in the Course of Miracles, which is this self is Brahman, the absolute consciousness. Yeah? So it begins with consciousness is what we are. Tat-tvamasi, that thou art, the teaching says. I am Atma Brahma, this self is consciousness or Brahman. And aham brahmasmi, I am consciousness. This is the awakening statement. And this is where it says in the Course of Miracles an equivalent.
But
Ta-da!
that I was thinking of that I'm the self.
Yeah.
Go on.
Okay. We'll do the next slide, and we'll take a quick look at what Vedanta is. But this is really the least important section of what we want to talk about this afternoon. It consists of 4 Vedas, Upanishads, which are, as it were, simply a small piece of each of the Vedas. There are approximately 10 major Upanishads that are used as teaching tools. There is the Brahma Sutra. There's the Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavan is the Sanskrit name for the Lord, or the Absolute, unconditioned pure presence. Bhagavad Gita means the song of the Lord, the expression of truth given to Krishna, given to Arjuna by Krishna. And this is like everybody's individual story put together in an allegorical form as a teaching. So these 3 texts, or these three areas of the teaching of Vedanta, is the totality of what we mean when we say Vedanta. Vedanta literally means Veda Ante, the end of the Vedas. The Vedas are the 4 great scriptural texts, these are the texts that go back like 2, 3, 4,000 years. We're not really sure. And most of the Upanishads are stories, because in the old days they didn't write things down, they memorized them. So the stories became a way of understanding the relationship between that which we consider to be ephemeral or constantly changing and reality. And so there's always going to be a relationship between the two drawn by the teacher. One definition of what we call reality or truth is it's unchanging in the 3 periods of time. If we consider the past, the present, and the future, that which has no effect upon reality or truth is the unchanging presence in which time takes place. So time becomes a superimposition. Ken Wapnick used to teach us a great deal about the working of time. You have something you would like to add on that one?
No, go on. I'll just interrupt whenever. You're doing so good.
We understand time from the standpoint of the past, which is a memory, the future, which is an understanding of the present projected into the future, but we also intuitively know that there is only the present moment. There isn't any other. And because we are so caught up in our awareness of, I have a history, which means really I have a story. I'm creating for myself an understanding of why I did or did not do a variety of activities in the past, and what effect they may have had, and what others did to me, and so on and so on and so on. So we create this picture book, which we call myself. So if we ask ourselves, who am I? We immediately go back into the memory banks and start thinking about, oh, okay, where did I come from? Who are my parents? What type of job do I have? What am I interested in? What foods do I like to eat? Who are my friends? I.e. Facebook. Yeah? The whole point about something like Facebook or any of these social programs is that they are there to feed egos. They're there to create an identification. This is me, and I am doing very good, thank you. Interesting to note that very few people on Facebook are actually interested in talking about the things that don't work. Yeah? It's always, I mean, I've known people who've gone through quite difficult times. Not one sentence about those difficult times that they were going through. And it's just the way we want to be. So we have some work when we get to approach the truth in, as it were, undressing ourselves. We have created a persona. Persona is Greek for mask. We have created a false identity. And that false identity, first of all, has to be realized, understood where it came from, and then appropriately discarded piece by piece, like peeling an onion. And that's the whole purpose of the Course of Miracles and Vedanta.
That's what the atonement is. The atonement is the whole process of undoing or removing or getting rid of that which is not true, so that you find out what is true.
Exactly.
Very simple.
Yes. And the miracle is where we, as it were, bow down to the principle and accept all others as none other than myself. We actually acknowledge the truth, and that's what the miracle is.
This is very scary to the ego, but it's very exciting to the self. I mean, to the realization that none of that stuff that we thought that we are, bad, not pleasant, angry, attacking, none of that is true. Never happened. Which may sound like an illusion to some people, but in matter of fact is that has to be true. It has to be true, because that's all you are. The rest of it's a bad dream. And what we're really doing is trying to struggle to awaken from this dream.
Exactly. And it actually helps quite a bit, as I found out, if one has already reached a level of, hey, this isn't working at all. It's quite helpful. I mean, when I was going through my 30s decade, it was a very difficult time indeed for me. And I was pretty desperate when I first met my teacher, Swami Chinmayananda. I had no idea what Vedanta was. And the first thing I heard from his lips was the analogy of the ocean. We've moved past it. The analogy of the ocean and the wave. I thought, wow, this really helps me understand the relationship between what I believed myself to be and what the possibility is. And so I love Emily Dickinson, for example, who says, I dwell in possibility. So that's what it is. This awakening is not an event, it's a process. And it's a becoming. And it's an isness. It's not a thing. There are, in reality, in the terms of the philosophy of which we are introducing this afternoon, there aren't any things, because things are objects. An object is not what I am, and not what everybody else is. Yeah? The wave is not an object. It is ocean. And when the ocean looks at waves, one can ask the question, does it even see waves? When it knows that it's ocean water. Well, when the awakened mind looks at the world of name and form, nama rupa in Sanskrit, and says, here are things which are, I think good, I think bad, I think wonderful, I think horrific. I am working out of my ego content. I am separating myself from the totality and passing judgment and creating a scenario. If I look at the ocean, creating all of these waves, but knowing for all time that is nothing but ocean water there, or the sun shining on the surface of the earth, and simply saying, I have no reason to choose between who gets illumined and who does not. So when we speak of reality, we're speaking of unconditional love. We're speaking that which has no identification with cause and effect. Cause and effect is always a relationship. Every effect must have a cause. The cause is nothing but the effect in a different form. Remove the cause and the effect must also disappear. Yeah? It's an absolute statement that nothing here exists in separation from itself. There is only one reality, and that one reality speaks just one total awareness. Not versions of it, not languages, not countries or geographic relationships. It says yes. In fact, what Ken Wapnick often used to say was, learn to say not no. Yeah? Which is not no to the possibility that we are already this truth that we spend so much time seeking to find. There's an analogy in some of the teachers', as it were, repository of stories about the jewel that had to be hidden from a robber. And this man was on an Indian train carrying this bill. I'll stop in the text. Carrying a jewel, and he thought to himself, where can I hide this jewel that this robber, whom I know is going to try and retrieve it from me, where can I hide it that he would never look? So he sidled up to the robber who was sitting next to him, pretending to read the newspaper, and he dropped the jewel in the robber's pocket. Knowing that he would never look in his own pocket. So people like Gangaji and so on, some of our modern day teachers use this as an analogy. We have hidden the truth from ourselves in the place that we won't look, within. And there is nowhere else that we will find it, even in a book. In fact, right at the beginning of the text, it says God is. And once we understand that God is, we can close the book. It's ended. Yeah? Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Therein lies the truth of God. Yeah? So what we truly learn from this process is to be silent. In the silence of awareness and of understanding, the truth forms in our consciousness. And because we are humans being, not human beings, but humans being, then that truth wells up in our inner awareness and consciousness as a reality. In fact, once one has finally identified with this process, one can see that it's the only reality that there is. Everything else is just icing on the cake. And in order to enjoy a slice of cake, we have to cut through this beautiful understanding of what we thought we were and get to the root. So that's
I like what you said earlier about thing. And there's a great quote from Marilyn Monroe who says, I am not a sex goddess is a thing. And I am not a thing. I am a person. I'm just Norma Jean.
Yes.
But so misidentified.
Next slide.
Okay.
Oh, we have it. Sorry.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. What is its purpose? The purpose of Vedanta is to provide a path for self-unfoldment. It answers the question, as does the Course in Miracles, who or what am I? For those who read some of the teaching, Ramana Maharshi was a great self-realized saint in India in the last century. And typically he would tell his students or people who would come to see him hoping for enlightenment, he would say, find out who you are. And they would look at him and say, oh, okay, how do I do that? And he would simply say, go back the way you came. Now, to a lot of people that would not really make a lot of sense. But if you've done some study and some self-inquiry in the process, vichara it's called in Sanskrit, to go back the way you came means peeling the layers of the onion. It's to find out who you are not by identifying all of the bits and pieces that we put together as the storyline. Yeah? A lot of what comes up for us is a form of presenting a constant presence of what we think we are to the outside world in relationship. And it's to see that process in action. And that's why the teachers and why the teaching asks us to go back into the inner awareness of how we have created this individual self and start peeling it away, piece by piece. And that's what gives us compassion, because now we understand that the way people are, other than how we see ourselves, is exactly the same, creating all of these individual icons, as it were, relationships, like little squares on a computer screen, and trying to understand where it all came from. So the compassion of understanding how that process arises as we do the work we need to do enables us to have that compassion and understanding for others. Yeah? Right? There are 3 stages in the study of Vedanta: Shravanam, Mananam, and Nididhyasana. Shravanam is to listen to the teacher and to the teaching, to study the text. This is what Ken Wapnick used to do and what John does, is to present the fundamental truths in ways that they can be absorbed, understood, and practiced. Those 3 things must come together: the understanding, the study, the understanding, and the practice. So the study with a teacher, reflection, or doing the work of considering, is this information for me, or is it just simply something that I am allowing to just come over the top of my head? Am I paying attention? Yeah. If you think about all of the things we've ever learned, they all have this process inherent in them. Learning the techniques, learning to practice those techniques, and then learning to do them without thinking about practicing those techniques. Yeah? So it becomes the way that, could we do this if we didn't adopt that principle? Could a doctor practice medicine if every time they had to pick up something and look at a book to understand what came next? Yeah? Or where to go in this particular surgical operation or in this giving of medicine. So the way that we learn to do what we do is by practicing. And this is what meditation and abiding awareness. I added the words abiding awareness. It means we never lose contact with reality as we go through our everyday. My teacher was once asked, how much meditation should we do? And he just smiled and he said, 24 hours a day. and he didn't mean that we will sit in a meditative asana position. He meant that is the time when you would reflect in silence and awareness. But when you get up from the meditation seat, you take your practice with you. Yeah. Different Eastern religions have different ways of doing this. We have Vipassana, which is the mindfulness technique of the Zen monks. But this actual process, if it's based on understanding, is effortless. This is the principle that we need to think. This is not work. This is actually who we are. This is the actual awareness which fuels all of the activities which kind of sit on the top. It's like the froth on the surface of the ocean. The ocean is busy churning underneath the surface. The waves are created by external forces. And they can look at all the different types of waves that there may be. And yet, underneath that is the pure, present, and quietness of reality. The totality which never disappears. It's unshakable. as we, I mean, there's been so many allegorical stories about it. I walk through the valley of death, unafraid, because with me is the pure spirit of the Lord. I mean, these are ancient biblical teachings, and yet they are exactly what Vedanta and the Course of Miracles illustrates for us.
Slide.
This is Vivekananda. Vivekananda is a very famous teacher of Vedanta. He was a disciple of Sri Ramakrishna. He gave a speech to the Parliament of Religions in Boston in about 1894, and this was a time when there was a great deal of ignorance about relationship, and he started off his speech by saying, men and women of the who are here present, men and women, all of you are an aspect of the consciousness of truth. Everyone. That was in a day when, I mean, we still see it, when there's a separation. There is no separation. Truth does not see separateness. I mean, this is the insightful awareness that we carry away from these teachings. The essence of Vedanta is that there is but one being, not many beings. One being, and that every soul, which is the apparent appearance of individuality, is that being in full and not apart. Another thing to understand from these ontological teachings, not only are there no objects, but there are no parts. We don't disassemble truth and say truth exists here but not there. One can simply say, I believe that God is everywhere. And then let that sink in. God is everywhere. Well, what does everywhere mean? Is it a conditional statement? When I say God is everywhere, or I say God is, which is a short form of saying God is everywhere, I mean everywhere. There is nowhere that there is no presence of truth. Nowhere. That's what Vedanta and the Course of Miracles both teach.
There's a line in the Course where somebody says, we say God is, and then we cease to speak.
Yes.
Yes. We say God is, and then we cease to speak. That's it. Words are not necessary. Go ahead, Dave. Should I go on to the slide?
Excuse me. What is the word God in Sanskrit?
Brahman.
Brahma.
Yes. And thank you for asking that. Because, and again, if I use, or sometimes I don't finish my thought, which is something that Lynn tries to keep track of for me. She's promised to raise her hand if I don't complete the sentence properly. There's two words in Sanskrit, Atma, A-T-M-A, and Brahman. Brahma is often called Brahman. Ayam Atma Brahman. This is the fourth of the Mahavakyas, the great sayings. This self is Brahman. Atma, it would equate loosely to the concept of soul. But we have a habit of saying, I have a soul, don't we? Who is it that has the soul? It would be more accurate to say, I am soul. And one does not have to give a succeeding definition of what I am, because why is there needs to be something added on to the end of it? One can just say, I am, which I think is what Yahweh in the Old Testament said, I am that I am. So this principle is not new. It's come bubbling up through human consciousness, not just for a few thousand of years, but human beings have been around on this planet for about 4.5 million. And all of the time there has been an awareness that human consciousness is just an aspect of the awareness or the totality of what we are. We like one of Swami Vivekananda's great affirmations was, "You are not beggars." He would say that to people in the 1890s. You are not beggars. You are not pleading for some degree of awakening. You are already that. All we have to do is to step out into the pure presence of the truth and not hold back from that. There is no condition, no parts, no religious rites that have to be performed. It is the truth. And I think that's one of the great gifts of the Course of Miracles. In the East, Hinduism, which is the religious background for Vedanta, is practiced very, very widely. Not all that many people practice Vedanta. Vedanta, in the sense that it is one of the three branches, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Jnana Yoga, the yoga of knowledge, is more difficult for many people. It's a somewhat intellectual understanding. So we approach the truth from various different aspects. Ramakrishna used to say, there's only one roof to the house, but there can be many ladders up to it. Yeah, many ways of doing the same thing. So that's what this beautiful thing is. And this next slide, how do we live the Vedanta? We can simply move quickly past this one because I've been talking about it.
Yeah.
The Bhagavad Gita is Krishna teaching Arjuna. Arjuna was a warrior prince. Krishna is an avatar. The story commences with Krishna seated in the chariot, minding his business, looking after the horses and guiding the chariot, and Arjuna in the back, who was kind of trying to figure out what to do next. Arjuna stands for the ego, the separated sense of individual self, which is the surface understanding of who and what we are. Krishna represents the absolute truth, the awareness, the Atma of the individual self. And he begins the story of the Bhagavad Gita by Arjuna, as it were, slumping down in the bottom of the chariot and saying, I have no idea what to do next. And it just so happens that the charioteer standing there suddenly receives all of the story that Arjuna wants to point out. So that's how it starts. And he teaches that, in essence, you are mistaken. You are not the body. You are not this sense of individual self that you believed yourself to be. This reality is beyond time and space. You are not an egoistic mind, separated from the truth. You are not your conditioning, your tendencies, your vasanas, well, that which has come through all of your experience and perhaps even through your DNA. You are this self, this reality. That's the story of the unfoldment of the Bhagavad Gita. Oh. Here we're going to go into the
Course in Miracles.
Course of Miracles.
Want to read the quote?
You read it, John.
You read it?
Please.
I'll read it, okay. Oneness is simply the idea God is, and in his being he encompasses all things. No mind holds anything but him. We say God is, and then we cease to speak. For in that knowledge words are meaningless. There are no lips to speak them, and no part of the mind sufficiently distinct to feel that it is now aware of something not itself. It has united with its source, and like its source itself, it merely is. How simple.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go on.
It's just a great feeling of contentment,
Yeah.
you know, of presence and silence and willingness to accept.
You know, there's nothing to worry about.
No.
I think that the ego mind is really an the Course says it's an insane mind.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing how it's insane, what it's going to be doing, it's going to be in a lot of fear and guilt and anxiety. And all of that, none of that exists.
Mm-hmm.
None of that has reality except to an ego.
Mm-hmm.
In the realm of an ego, that seems to have a lot of reality. So we're just keeping pointing to the truth here.
The next slide I think I've already talked about. These are the four great statements contained in the Upanishads.
And we'll go ahead.
Pardon me?
May you go next?
Yeah, we'll do the next one because I know time is
Right.
is passing.
Right.
Relatively,
Even though it's not real.
Relatively speaking. In the eyes of the body, time exists. That's all one can say. And what happens now?
We got no body.
At no single instant does the body exist
at all. That's a quote I gave earlier.
Yes.
Can you read the rest of it?
Yes.
It is always remembered or anticipated, but never experienced just now. Only its past or future make it seem real. Time
Ta-da.
controls it entirely. For sin, separation is in quotes actually, is never wholly in the present. In any single instant, the attraction of guilt would be experienced as pain and nothing else, and would be avoided. It has no attraction now. Its whole attraction is imagery, and therefore must thought of in the past or in the future. Must be thought of, I guess, in the past or future. I think, by the way, this is a topic that I'd like to approach next time in January. I mean, to talk more about the whole attachment thing, to especially guilt.
Mm-hmm.
The Course talks about what it calls the attraction of guilt and the attraction of God. So we'll give that topic some attention. That's January. Let's go on.
That which keeps us in place, you know? We're used to certain phenomena in this world, like magnetism. The law of attraction is just simply another form of magnetism. It's the way that like attracts like. And if we've created a persona or an image of ourselves, then naturally we're going to attract to ourselves that which is most appropriate or in conformity with the concept of who we think we are. That's why it's so important to understand that this process, described in the Course in great detail, much more than in Vedanta. Vedanta is what I consider to be a kind of a top-down approach. It starts with a definition of what truth is, and then expands that to include us all, without exception. I find, and the reason I went to sit at the feet of Ken Wapnick was simply, I wanted to learn more about the psychology, how the human mind actually adopts these postures, which are ultimately revealed as nothing but window dressing. That's not what we are. And yet we're so, as it were, attracted to this persona that we hold it most dearly. We struggle and work so hard to maintain these images that we've created of ourselves. In fact, what we are learning to do is not only to let go, but to let be, to be accepting of who and what we are as individuals, what in Sanskrit we will call jiva. The jiva is the embodied presence that we call ourselves. And part of the psychology of the Course is to be comfortable with that. I never heard Ken ever, and John either, for that matter, ever condemn any action which an individual took, other than to express the possibility that has a learning potential inherent in it. And I learned that myself and when I was in my 30s. I did the work and I did the understanding, and I was ready to go and listen to a teacher of Vedanta. But I didn't choose that. This is the incredible thing. I in no way had the slightest understanding of the process that I was unconsciously involving myself in, and finding myself at the feet of a Vedanta teacher, traveling around India with him, and 10 years earlier I'd have said, "You're crazy. I'm never going to do anything like this. How could I? I was emigrating to Canada with a family. And one of the hardest things is to, and now my children, I'm close to them, and they're living in Toronto and out in Vancouver, and I spend time with them. But the hardest thing is to see your children get on an airplane and go back to where they came from. And all of the efforts that one put into that, immigration is hard work, to put into that process just went out the window, just disappeared. And so all I could do was to say, okay, I will try to send you the money that you need to live on. But I had no idea of what the future held for me. And I stumbled around trying to find a solution. And it's when we come across teachers that are able to elaborate on the process that we finally have this self-discovery or self-unfoldment take place. But in no way, shape or form could I ever have said that I chose it. I was not in control. The only thing I could do was simply do the next thing that seemed to be appropriate. I had to earn a living. I had to live in an apartment and so on and so forth. It just so happened I was very blessed in a way to have the type of job that I could go on to a part-time, what they call contract work. So I worked for a bank or worked for something like and worked for 3 or 4 months, and then I could quit. I'd earned enough money, I could go off and be with my teacher. So that was a great blessing, and I didn't know that. And the whole thing unfolded again and again and again. I went with other teachers. I've met my own teacher. I've been with Buddhist teachers. And I think, how could I, in my early years, have possibly considered that this could happen? So these are like miracles, really. They're unfoldments which are beyond comprehension.
Out of curiosity, how many of you feel as though you found the Course? It found you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it found you at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
And it appeared exactly when it needed to appear in your life. Yes. You're going to hand the mic over to Stop. Yeah, we...
Okay, fine.
Okay, we'll wait.
Hold it. Wait, sure.
Okay.
Next slide.
Next slide.
This is another Vivekananda quote. The Vedanta recognizes no sin. It only recognizes error. And error can be defined as stepping away from one's understanding of the truth. If the truth has been revealed in any way, shape or form, then, as Ken Wapnick would say, learn to say not no to the awareness of truth. That's all. So there's absolutely no condemnation in either of these teachings, none whatsoever. When one has an understanding, as the teachers do, that God is everywhere, just like the sun shines on everything, God is everywhere. Where can there be condemnation? Where can there be separation? Where can there be denial? Where can there be conditioning? Those are all, as it were, superfluous additions placed in seeming existence by a producer, what Ken would have called the decision maker. We're going to talk about the ego. I don't know if we'll get to the ego before we break, but this is so important to see. Every time a course student puts his hand up and says, I am having such trouble with the people next door whose dog come and poop on my yard, one can say, there it goes. Yeah? Because we are paying attention to the ephemeral, to that which is constantly changing. There's always an alternative. Sometimes it's not so easy to find what the alternative is, but always to be in the position of awareness, understanding, and willingness to present the loving kindness of what the emanation of truth calls for. What Buddhism calls loving kindness. That's why I chose the word, loving kindness. That's the... What, we can maybe go past the next two.
Okay.
And move on to, I think, because we have, 15 minutes?
Yes.
That should be enough time for you to cover the ego, I think.
We'll give it a try.
Give it a try, John.
Okay, to you speak sincerely? Is that the slide you're on?
Yes.
Okay.
You're going to go and try for
Oh,
this?
you mean to read it?
Yeah,
Oh.
this is all Course stuff now.
Oh, I see. Okay.
The ego is really the Course content for a large part of it, and I loved it.
You speak sincerely, but your sorrow has no cause. The wise grieve neither for the living nor for the dead. There has never been a time when you, Arjuna, and I, Krishna, have not existed, nor will there be a time when we will cease to exist. It is reasonable, right?
Yes.
To ask how the mind could ever have made the ego. In fact, it is the best question you could ask. Everyone makes an ego or a separate self for himself, which is subject to enormous variations because of instability, and also makes an ego for everyone else he perceives, which is equally variable. David?
Well, one of the things I think that I take from that, it says, it is reasonable to ask how the mind could ever have made the ego. In fact, it is the best question you could ask, because that is the question that Vedanta asks too. You know, what have we made but a grotesque representation of the reality that we actually are? Yeah. And it mentions in the second section, everyone makes an ego or a separate self which is subject to enormous variation because of its instability. This awareness of the root of what we truly are is that absolute sense of being. Everything goes, as it were, back into that crucible of awareness. One of the beautiful icons of Christian mysticism is the cup. Yeah? And what does that cup represent? The essence of who and what we are. It's not, what do I think I am? What have I created as my persona? What part am I playing on this stage of life? You know? There are so many beautiful expressions of this one truth, that I have created a concept of who and what I believe myself to be, and I have to let that go. There has to be, as it were, a willingness to drop the misidentification before the truth can be revealed. Yeah. We can't coexist with misunderstanding. That's the essence behind these teachings.
Of course, the real question is, who created the misperception
Mm-hmm.
in the first place?
Yeah. You want to answer that?
You answer it.
An example of blame.
Well, we can call it the ego, but then,
Yeah.
you know what? There is no ego.
There's no ego.
So
No.
then where do you go from there?
No, that's right. It's a case of mistaken identity. That's all it is.
Right.
That's right. And I think the question is not so much why the ego exists, it's why do we give it the strength and power that it has, you know? Because it's so easy when one knows the extent of the fallacy to let go of it. And there's a, as it were, my teacher used to sometimes say, watch a monkey in the tree. Yeah, in fact, there's two stories. Watch a monkey climb a tree. It will climb a tree, and when it wants to get to the next branch, it has to leap and let go of the branch that it's holding on to. For a brief moment in time, there's no support. And the monkey mind doesn't like to have no support. It needs to, as it were, hold on to some sense of identity. And we are cultivating the capacity to step beyond the need to maintain a semblance of continuity. That's all it is. It's not so much that we can intellectually understand, but the moment we step outside that intellectual understanding, we revert back again. And that's habituated behavior. So willingness to let go of this where this magnetism concept comes in. The willingness to let go is the willingness to deactivate the attraction. The law of attraction works in both ways. It wants us to hold on to what we understand and know, and yet there's a yearning to understand and accomplish what we are now becoming aware of. One has to be greater than the other. Yeah? So we have to actually say, I know that I am the truth, and I have to live it. And once one lives it and lives from it, then the attraction to the false sense of self is weakened and gradually disappears. That's all. The body is a temporary conveyance. Born, lives, and eventually dies. And so to be attracted to and to hold that as to be the only image that's meaningful to us is going to end eventually in collapse. Yeah? So there's a one side to look at it and then another side to look at it.
In fact, the collapse is inevitable.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's why you should never worry about egos and try to point out the problems with egos, because they will implode.
Yeah.
There's an implode built into the ego itself.
That's right.
And it cannot avoid that implode. It will pop at some point.
In India, they catch monkeys by tying a glass jar to the base of a tree and putting a little piece of sweetmeat or a candy inside the jar. And the monkey sees the man do that. They do show it. Hey, come and look at this little monkey. Puts it down, walks away. The monkey goes over, puts his hand in the jar, grabs the sweet, and won't let go. Won't let go. So the jar is tied to the tree. The fist now cannot come out through the jar's mouth. It's holding on to it. Yeah? And the man walks over with a sack and just pops it over the top of the monkey, and the monkey gets all frightened and lets go, and Bob's your uncle. No more free monkey. So the monkey mind works much the same way. As long as we have enough attractions in our life, it's pretty darn hard to let go. We have to substitute. We have to see that the truth represents a greater degree of satisfaction and attraction than continued identification with the temporary joys of the ego. That's why the teacher keeps on saying it's temporary, it's conditioned, it's not going to last. Things that go up and down constantly. Waves appear and disappear all of the time. Every time the wave disappears, is it going to squeal out, I'm dying? No. The body was going to drop. The sense of individual self will disappear. So what? Where was it before the body came into existence? It's illogical. It doesn't make sense. So that's why these great teachers of truth, the Greeks and the Romans, would often come and have these understandings which would be so clear to the rest of us, that there always has to be an aspect of awareness which manifests and teaches in each age.
I think one of the things that's nice about the Course is the Course is really a process of letting go slowly. That's why you have 365 lessons. It takes a minimum of a year to get through this, and you get to the end and it says you're at the beginning, because it's this process. And there's actually a line in chapter 16 where it says, "Fear not that you'll be hurled into reality." Because if you were hurled into reality, you really wouldn't be able to handle it. It would like sort of rip you apart. Mm-hmm. But to come apart slowly, to undo the ego bit by bit by bit, recognizing that it's not true, it's a gentle process, right? Mm-hmm. And it even describes, like, when it talks about the death of the body is our primary form of identification, right? Except at some point we all know we're going to have to let it go. So it's really a good idea. I think hospice programs that are more sympathetic to this kind of approach now, that sort of allow people to go through a gentle death process, that's a great thing to be done, to sort of let it go gently. And so in the process of letting it go gently, then you begin to find out who you really are, which is none of the external stuff. that appeared to be real.
We may have time to do the next 2 slides before the break.
We only got time for one.
Okay. Well, the second one is very short.
Oh, okay.
It's just a continuation if you
Oh,
pop
I
it
see,
up on
continuation.
the screen.
Oops.
This is a very nice slide. I like this one very much.
Oh, this is a long one, though. But I'll read the whole thing.
Go ahead.
You react to your ego much as God does to his creations, with love, protection, and charity. Your reactions to the self you made is not surprising. In fact, they resemble in many ways how you will one day react to your real creations, which are as timeless as you are.
This I loved so much when I read. John picked this out and put it in our presentation, and I just loved it because it just really speaks to that switch from one attachment to another. What my teacher used to say, we detach and attach. We detach from the conditioned sense of self and attach to the reality. That's in the mental understanding of the process that goes on. So he's the teacher, what this Jesus is saying here, how one day you will react to your real creations in the same way as we currently react to our conditioned creations now. So it's a foregone conclusion, inevitably. Do you want to finish the other slide?
Sure. The question is not how you respond to the ego, but what you believe you are.
Exactly. Yes.
Belief is an ego function, and as long as your origin is open to belief, you're regarding it from an ego viewpoint. When teaching is no longer necessary, you will merely know God.
Mm-hmm.
Belief that there is another way of perceiving is the loftiest idea of which ego thinking is capable. That is because it contains a hint, a recognition that the ego is not the self.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I like the belief that there is another way is the loftiest idea
Mm-hmm.
of which the ego is thinking is capable.
Mm-hmm.
All right?
What is amazing to me, who came to the Course of Miracles quite late, after so many years of study of Vedanta, was to find how clearly and completely the marriage between the two thought systems takes place. And I'm, I know how the Course was created. Like many people, I was a little, skeptical to begin with. And when I read it and started studying it, and Lynn was a proponent and helped me through that, I suddenly realized that what was stated in the Course of Miracles is identical in principle to what's stated in the thousands and thousands of years of development and evaluation, which we call Vedanta. It's amazing. And because of its basic materiality and background, it's more readily available to people in the West than Vedanta is. So I'm really appreciative of the teachers of the Course in Miracles and how it's helped me understand some of the greater meaning that I discovered in Vedanta. So I thank John and I thank Ken Wapnick especially. And there are many other teachers too. I wouldn't only mention the ones I've actually been with, but I appreciate their efforts greatly.
I think one of the reasons that it came now is because, as you talked about this earlier, David, we now had the psychology.
Right.
There was no such thing as psychology at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly nothing that had been developed.
Right.
It's no accident that it was given to a psychologist, and not only a psychologist, but a brilliant psychologist who really understand depth psychology all the way through and understood what the ego was and how it worked, and had to play with her own ego in the process of writing this whole thing. You have to appreciate Helen's humanity in addition to her spirituality. We're at the time for our break, so we'll take a 15-minute break, and it's 15 minutes, not 20 minutes. Okay, so we'll come back.